I'm going to be walking you through today's webinar, which is all about workflows. So let's take a look at the agenda. We're going to talk about everything related to setting up your workflows, and we will, of course, break down certain parts with some common examples in order to avoid getting too deep in the weeds with things. We want to give you a great overview and cover a lot today. So here's how we're going to do things today. We will start by going over the basics of workflows by explaining what the different terms actually mean. After that, we're going to jump straight into the steps for creating a pipeline. Now, while we talk about all of that, we'll cover how to set up both regular and conditional automations, since that's actually the main attraction here. Once all of that's clear, we'll talk about creating dependency and automatically moving jobs through your pipeline. Now, those are all the basic things that you'll set up initially to have a fully functional automated pipeline. But then we'll show you more ways to improve on that process by creating and managing recurring jobs, automating your team assignment, showing you how to track your jobs. And finally, we'll talk a bit about our templates and the library. So let's get started here. The workflow is the umbrella term that covers everything work-related, but the main terms that you need to know about pipelines, stages, jobs, and tasks. Those are the big ones. Pipelines represent the whole process that you do for a specific service. This means that the pipeline itself is the process, and because of that, you'll have it split into stages, meaning the steps that you will take to complete that process. Stages are the steps in those processes. Jobs are those same processes, but for certain clients. Jobs always need to be in a pipeline. So, depending on what the job is for, you will add it to the appropriate pipeline. Last, tasks are just the individual actions you or your team will need to complete. So to give you an example, we prepared this slide. So let's take a close look at this. This example is for a tax return process, but it's applicable for any other services you provide. You can see that the pipeline is the whole process that's broken down into several steps, or in other words, stages. Then you have the clients you're providing the services for added as jobs into the pipeline. And lastly, you have the individual things you need to do, like preparing, reviewing, or e-filing the return. Those are set up as tasks. So as you can see, there's a clear hierarchy here when it comes to how you will approach this. Your process might look different than what I have here in this example, but again, it's going to follow the same basic logic. Now, after this webinar, you should take a moment to actually write down your process from start to finish, meaning all the things that your firm does as part of the service. That way, you'll be able to plan and build your pipelines much more efficiently later on. For now, though, we're just going to jump right into that. All right, so let's go. To create a pipeline, you will want to go to your settings page and then the pipelines tab. Here, you will find two buttons. One is to create a new pipeline, and the other is to copy one from our library. For now, I'm just going to focus on making one from scratch. We'll touch on that. Now, once you click the Create Pipeline button, you're going to see a lot of options. So let's take it from the top. The first field will let you name the pipeline. You likely want to name it after the service that the pipeline is for. The Available To field is where you will add all your team members that will handle jobs related to this pipeline. If you don't add them here, then they won't be able to see the pipeline at all. The Sort Jobs By field that you see determines how all the job cards in your pipeline will be ordered. This is, of course, a personal preference, so set it to whatever you prefer, but one of the best practices is to set it to time in stage, oldest first. This way, you'll see the jobs that have been sitting in a stage for the longest period of time first. Now, the next field is for the default job template. Job templates let you automatically enter job details instead of having to type them all out. So things like the job name, the description, assignee, due date, things like that can be automatically entered once you make a job template. You then just need to select that same template here in this field, and every time there are new jobs, they will use that template. Now, the other fields won't require too much explaining, so let's get to those. The toggles right under the job template field let you customize what information you'll see on the job cards. I actually prepared 2 examples so we can compare this. Here is an example of jobs with all the toggles disabled and with all of them enabled. You're able to see that all of the job information when you expand a job in either case. So the toggles in the settings will only affect what you see on the card itself. The next option here in the settings is for the job recurrences, but we're going to skip this for now since it is optional, and it's best to focus on learning how to build the pipeline first. So we already explained earlier what stages are, but here is how to add them. You can either use the Add Stage button or the plus button next to your stages. That will create a stage, and you can then name it, drag it to reorder your stages, add automations to it, or delete it if you don't actually need it. Now, this step is really simple, so just add as many stages as you need for your processes. Now, I mentioned earlier that you should break down your processes by writing all of these steps down. Once you do that, you'll see that this step here isn't going to take very long at all. I'll give you the most common example structure here just to point you in the right direction, get you started. Here are all the stages that I would use in a tax return process. I would start by getting all the client information and documents, then prepare the return, send the draft and invoice to the client before requesting their signature, and then finally e-filing it. If your process requires additional stages, no problem, just add them. Basically, plan it so whatever you have to wait for something to be completed before you can start the next step is, make sure it is a separate stage. Now, I need to wait for a client's document before I can start actually preparing the return. So I will have 2 stages here. Otherwise, if multiple things can be done simultaneously, then you can use a single stage for them. Even though this example is for tax preparation, you will use the same logic when you are building pipelines for other services. Now, after adding all of the stages you need, you will turn your attention to adding automations to those stages. So let's focus on that right now. If we rewind just a moment to get back to what I was saying about planning out your process, I want to add on to that. When it comes to automating your processes, you should think about one more thing besides the overall structure. Think about bottlenecks. Everybody deals with some type of bottlenecks, and with our automations, you're going to be able to get rid of a lot of those. So let me give you some examples of this. Now, let's say at the start of your process, you need to reach out to your clients and have them do certain things like sign an engagement letter. Well, that takes time and resources from your team, doesn't it? Well, if you use automations, you can have TaxDome send an email and the engagement letter to the client, as well as remind them about it regularly until they get things moving. Now, something as simple as these constant reminders will help you avoid situations where your clients ignore their responsibilities until the very end of a deadline, and suddenly you have to deal with everybody and everything all at once. But maybe we can go for a different example. Normally, when you need someone from your team to do something, you will have to communicate with them and create some type of task, won't you? Well, alternatively, you can use TaxDome to speed that up as well. Just add a task automation And whatever it's time for your team to do, they'll get the task. They'll be notified about it and they can get started. So let's go back to the settings so I can show you all the automations that you can use. If I click on the Add Automation button, you will see the full list of them here. They're mostly self-explanatory, so let's not spend a lot of time going through them one by one here. Instead, I would recommend taking a look at this help article, which has full explanations of what each one of them does. So you can check that out later as you're going through and getting things set up. You'll likely get some really good ideas for new ways that you can solve those bottlenecks. To add an automation, you'll just select it from the list and a new menu will slide out. Now, for most templates, you'll need to select a template which will be used. For example, if you added a message automation, well, then you'll have to select the message template that you want to be sent out to your clients. Now, if you don't have one, you'll be able to create one with this button. And then once you're done, you can simply select it in the pipeline settings. Other automations might ask you to do something else. Let's use this one as an example. Here, you don't get to choose any template, but instead you choose who you want to be assigned once a job reaches this particular stage, and also who you want to be unassigned. Setting this up is really straightforward, so you're not going to get stuck here. Don't worry about that. You're not limited to one automation per stage, so add as many as you think you need. This is entirely customizable to the way you do things. Adding more automations is just as simple as it was for the first one. Just click the button, choose the automation you want, and just add what it needs. Okay, so now that you've seen how to add automations, I want to show you a slightly more advanced way to use them. Now, before I do, I just want to point out that you don't need to immediately worry about setting this up, since the normal automations work just fine and you'll be using them in most cases. However, we do want to make sure that you know all of your options that are available to you. So what we're going to focus on now are our conditional automations. Now I'm going to pull up a slide here to make this a little bit easier for everybody to see. So here we go. The very first thing I want to clear up here is that the conditional automations aren't a different set of automations. You will use the same ones that you use for your regular automations, but after you add one, you will have an option to add a condition to any one of them. I'm going to show you exactly how in a moment, but let me explain that a little bit more first. So you may wonder what the condition is at this point. To put it simply, it's a tag. When adding conditions, you're prompted to select one or more tags, and that makes the automation trigger only for the clients that have all those tags applied to them. So this means that if you spend some time and categorize your clients with tags, you'll have a greater level of automation available to you. So let me go back to the portal. I want to show you a really common example here. Now, I already have a couple of automations here, but I'll make some changes. Let's take this proposal automation as an example. If I click on the Edit button and then press the Add Condition button here, I'll see the menu that I mentioned earlier. I'll pick my new client tag and apply it. You might expect that there's a bunch more steps to all of this, but actually this is it. All I have left to do is to save the pipeline and boom, I'm done, nothing else. The condition has been set up in a couple of clicks. And you can use this to send specific invoices to the appropriate client groups, request different documents, or really do anything that you can come up with as long as your clients are tagged appropriately. I'm going to give you another example here since there's a second way to use these conditions. Instead of adding a condition to the individual automations, you can add a condition to an entire stage. You can see the button for that right here. Now, the way this works is the client needs to have the selected tags just for their job to enter the stage. If they don't, then they will completely skip it. A basic example is having a stage for a client that needs an extension, but you can go beyond that. In this pipeline, I have separate stages for the different client types. For one type, I need to request documents from them, while for the other, I can pull them myself. So my approach will change, and the following steps might be a little bit different as well. This way, I can use the same pipeline to have them all in one place, but without having any confusion about what I need to do for each one of my clients. Additionally, you won't have to open the client's account or go back to the client's page to add the appropriate tag for them. If they don't have it, no problem. You can just open their job and you'll have a field where you can add it instantly. You can set this up however you'd like, but the important thing is that you saw that it's not really that difficult. It's just a matter of building your pipeline the same way as you normally would, but then you add conditions wherever it might be necessary. Now, let's go ahead and switch things up a little bit. So far, we talked a lot about setting the pipeline up, and we mentioned that jobs will be moving through the pipeline or even skipping certain stages, but we haven't talked about how yet. While working on the previous steps that we covered, you probably noticed that there was a toggle in every stage, the auto move jobs toggle. Let's talk about that. Enabling this allows creating dependency. Jobs will automatically move from one stage to another once all pending linked elements have actually been completed. Now, this is going to make a huge difference for your efficiency since you won't need to do as much administrative work moving jobs manually. So, for the auto move to work, in most cases, you will want to have one or more automations in a stage that can serve as the trigger for the auto move. This means that any element that is considered pending after it's been created can be used for this purpose. Therefore, proposals, organizers, invoices, messages with client tasks and firm tasks can all be used as auto move triggers. Here's an example. This job is currently in a stage that has a task automation. So my team needs to complete this linked task. Since it's the only pending element out there right now, as soon as it's marked complete, the job will automatically be moved right into the next stage. Now, besides your automations, you can also manually link other pending elements to a job, and they will also serve as a trigger for the auto move. You can link elements simply by opening a job, clicking on the link button in the top right corner, and then selecting the specific element you want to link. Now, a common example of this is linking a document that you requested a signature on to a job. Despite originally not being part of your pipeline, once the client signs the document that is now linked to the job, then it's going to move forward. So just make sure that your auto move toggles are enabled for the stages where you want your jobs to automatically move, and either add some sort of automation to serve as the trigger or manually link an element such as a document pending or any other action from the client. Now, we'll start talking about how you'll be adding jobs to your pipelines, and more specifically, how you're going to automate this, because we just talked about both of those things. All right, so let's start with the steps you need to take when you want to add jobs manually. There's actually a couple of ways, so I'll list them here on this slide to save us all a little bit of time. You can add jobs via the plus new menu, the add job button inside a pipeline, and the clients list by selecting the accounts and then clicking add job. And this is, by the way, the best way to add clients to a pipeline in bulk. Now, this is really as simple as just pressing the button and entering the details. So we don't really need to spend a lot of time going over this. Instead, let's just immediately switch our focus to setting up recurring jobs. We'll go back to the pipeline settings, and there we'll see the section that we chose to ignore a little earlier on in the webinar. I'll enable the toggle here, and the first thing I'll want to do is set up a schedule. Pick the recurrence period and the start date for now, since that is the most important part. The end date is optional, since that just determines up until when it will keep recurring. Also, since the jobs will be automatically created, the information from the default job template you selected here will be used for the job, so make sure that you have one. You can also select different templates for different clients, but we're going to get into that in a bit. Anyhow, after setting up these details here, just save the pipeline and go back to its Kanban view. Now, even though you may have set up the basic details in the settings, the pipeline won't start creating jobs until you choose which clients it's going to do it for. You'll notice the Manage Recurrence button on the right. Click on it, and this is where you'll add the list of clients for whom jobs will be automatically created. Click on the New Recurrence button, and then add everyone you want. Now, to make this easier, you can also filter the list the same way you would do in the Clients page. Now, once you select everyone you want, simply click Continue. Now, let's quickly talk about this step here. You already set up the start date, recurrence period, job template, and everything else in the template settings. In this step, though, you can make changes to that for the clients you selected. This means that you could have something like a general bookkeeping pipeline where you can then set up custom schedules for weekly, monthly, and quarterly clients instead of creating completely separate pipelines for them. So that makes things a lot easier. So if you set up some conditional automations like we talked about earlier, you could automate and streamline your processes like you never have been able to before. Now, after you set up the details for the clients you selected, click on Create, and they'll be added to the list of recurrences. You'll see when the next recurrence date is for, and you can make further adjustments whenever necessary. Now, to do that, you either click on the three dots and select Recurrence Settings, or select multiple clients and then use the button that appears in the top right corner. To make things even easier for yourself, you might want to manage all of that from a different place. There's a Job Recurrences tab up here whenever you're in the Workflows page. There, you'll see all the active recurrences and their details in a much nicer table view. From here, you can do the same thing that I showed you in the menu inside the pipeline. It basically just comes down to personal preference, which one that you would prefer to use. But this tab is overall a bit more convenient for it. So let's make sure to try that out. Let's recap this part just to make sure we don't forget about any of the important points. To set up recurring jobs, you'll first need to enable recurrences in the pipeline settings and select default settings for a start date and recurrence period. After that, you have to add recurrences for the clients that you want to automatically create jobs for. This can either be done in the pipeline itself via the Manage Recurrences button or from the Job Recurrences tab. Also, any recurrences you add can be customized, meaning they don't have to follow the default schedule you set up, but instead you can have unique schedules for any recurrences, and you can even change things like the job template that will be used and the assignees. Using these tools to your advantage can help you actually in various cases. For example, if you have some clients that maybe start on a different day than the rest, well, you can alter the schedule for those. Now, I already gave an example earlier where I mentioned that you can have different bookkeeping type clients in the same pipeline. For these, you would change both the schedule and the job template, since the latter would make it easy to differentiate the job. Another example would be if you had your team members handling different client groups. You could set them as assignees for their respective clients in the recurrence settings, and every time the pipeline will create a new job for them, the correct person would automatically get assigned. Now, since we're talking about your team and assigning them to the correct clients, we should also take some time to talk about the way you will handle this. So let's take a look at this slide for a quick breakdown of what we need to talk about here. We'll start by reiterating how to give someone pipeline access. Then we'll talk about changing the account assignee through automations. Then we're going to focus on managing the job and task assignment. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. Now, as you know, you are able to control who from your team will have access to which pipelines. This is done in the Available To field in your pipeline settings. You'll only want to add the team members who actually need to interact with this pipeline. So giving your team members access to the pipelines for the processes that they're involved in, instead of getting them involved in everything, it's going to make their life a lot easier since they're going to have a cleaner, focused job day and less cluttered portal. Now, seeing the pipelines and seeing the jobs are two separate things though. By default, your team members will only be able to see the jobs related to the clients they have been assigned to, unless you have given them the ability to see everybody. So if you want a team member to be able to see a client and their information, including their jobs, you need to give your team member access to that account. Now, we're going to talk about this in our team management webinar since it tackles this in a lot more detail. But the quickest way to handle account assignment on the spot is by going to the clients page, selecting the clients you want to assign a team member to, and then clicking on the Manage Team button. There, you can assign or unassign anyone from your team. However, there are ways to handle account, job, and task assignment directly in your pipeline. So we're going to focus in on that. But let me just get back to my pipeline settings. I'm going to show you how to do that. All right, so we talked about automation earlier in this webinar, but the examples we used didn't focus too much on team assignments. So let's focus on that right now. We'll start with the Update Account Access automation. When you add this to a stage, you will be able to automatically give or remove account access once the job reaches that stage. Now, since this is a tax preparation pipeline that I'm in, I'll use a tax preparation example. Initially, my tax preparer doesn't have access to any client accounts, but I'll give them access right here. This way, whenever a client job enters this stage, my tax preparer will be able to view the client's information and interact with him. Additionally, in the next stage, I can set up another Update Account Access automation, but this time it will be to remove the account access from the preparer again. As part of the same automation, you can even give access to somebody else. As you unassign one team member, you can reassign somebody else. This way, my team members only have access to the client accounts when it's necessary, and I don't have to make any manual adjustments. So now that you know how to make sure that your team will have access to the clients, let's talk about how you'll assign them to their jobs and tasks. Since we're already here, we'll talk first about how to do it with automations. The two specific ones we need are the Update Job Assignees and Create Task Automations. We'll start with the former. The Update Job Assignees task lets you reassign the job to someone else or add additional assignees once the job reaches the stage with this automation. So it's very similar to the account access one. Therefore, we don't need to spend too much time on it. We don't want to rehash how it works because you already understand that at this point. You're most likely already going to have a job assignee even before you use this automation, since you'll have selected somebody in the default job template you're using, or you selected somebody specific as part of their recurrent settings. However, with this, you simply have even more ways to control the job assignee. The Create Task automation will work a bit differently when it comes to controlling who the assignee is. When you add it, you'll have to select the template you made, and just like before, if you don't have one, you can use this button right here to create a brand new one. As you can see, there's a field for the assignee in the task template. So you will select a specific person here, add the other details, and save it. So if I then select a template here, it will simply use the assignee from the task. However, there's a toggle here in the automation that lets you match the task assignee to the job assignee. If you enable this, it's going to override whoever had selected in the template. So if you think back to the fact that you also have an automation for changing the job assignee, you can likely already tell that you can pair these two up throughout your pipeline, and that way have the job assignee be responsible for the task without needing to do any manual reassignments. You can automate the whole thing. Now there's also one more way you can use this: conditional automations. Now if you remember, you can use them to trigger different automations depending on what tags your clients have. So if your clients had tags to indicate who from your team is handling them, you could use conditional automations to assign things properly. As an example, you can have multiple update job assignee automations, and you'd add a different tag to each one. That way, only one of these will be triggered, and the task automation will then match the assignee to the correct job assignee. You've got a lot of room for creativity when it comes to how you want to use conditions, but this is definitely a popular approach if you have a lot of team members and you want to avoid having somebody manually assign things. So let's quickly summarize this section because there was a lot of information here. To have access to a pipeline, you need to add the team member to the Available To field in your pipeline settings. To see jobs in that pipeline, the team member needs to have access to the client accounts for the jobs that they are for. You can automate giving and removing account access by using your pipeline's automations. You can change the job assignee with the Update Job Assignee automation. And for tasks, you can either set the assignee in the task template, you can match them to the job assignee, or you can use conditional automations. So before we proceed, we should just bring something up here. We already talked about almost everything related to building your workflows. So let me just point out that you should also test your pipelines fully before you start adding real clients to them. And it's as simple as creating a test client that you can log in as, adding them to the pipeline, and then completing the full process from start to finish from both sides of the equation. That way, you can make sure that the automations are being triggered properly, that the auto move works, and you also get a chance to notice any further room for improvement in your process as you go through this test. Once everything is up and running properly and you start adding your clients to your pipelines, you'll certainly want to know how to keep an eye on everything. So let's talk about that next. There are a couple of places you'll be able to find information. We'll start here in the Kanban view of the pipeline. Now you've seen it several times now throughout this webinar, but we haven't stopped to talk about it. It's got a similar structure to how you see the stages in your pipeline settings, but in each stage, you'll see the jobs that are currently there. As I mentioned near the beginning of the webinar here, you'll be able to change the order the jobs are displayed in, but you can also use the filter button here on the right to control what you see. So if you want to see just the jobs that are due on a specific date, or jobs that are assigned to a certain team member, you can always filter it down. We understand though that even with filtering, you may have tons of jobs in a pipeline and you would prefer a different way to keep up with them. For those purposes, we have the Jobs tab at the top of the page. Here, all the jobs will be shown in a list type view. You're still able to see all the details, filter them, interact with them the same way that you would in the Kanban view, but this is a more compact view here. So for large quantities of jobs, you might choose to use this view. Personal preference for you. The other main advantage is that you're not limited to just seeing the jobs from one pipeline here. By default, it will show you all jobs that you have access to, while in the Kanban view, you'll only see the jobs that one pipeline you opened. You can also export your jobs from here. If you use the export button, it will export them into a spreadsheet, but you can also use this print button here to simply create a PDF list of everything that you see here. Therefore, the Kanban view of a pipeline and the Jobs tab are the main places you'll use to keep track of your jobs. But what about the tasks? Tasks can be viewed in a couple of places as well, but your primary one will be the Tasks tab right next to the Jobs one. Here you'll see the same type of view, but it will show you all your tasks and you can interact with them. Initially, you'll only see your own tasks, but you're able to change which ones you want to see in this menu. You can then choose between your own, all of them, or just the unassigned ones. Once again, just as it was the case with the jobs, you can also filter or export these lists. So keep that in mind if that's something that you're going to need. Now, the other place where you'll likely often interact with your tasks is from within your jobs. If I open one of my pipelines again, I'll open a job and you'll see that everything related to it is connected and even categorized. So I can see and access organizers, messages, proposals, and more, including the tasks. So as you're working, you can always go into a job to find all the relevant things instead of having to go through several different pages to find it. Last, I just want to mention one more thing before we move on to our final topic. If you go back to your Insights page, you'll be able to see some useful information there as well. So, for example, here you have this section for jobs. It gives you an easy way to find out how many jobs you have and also what state they are in. As for the tasks, you'll have a to-do list for them right here. By default, you'll only see the ones that are due today or the ones that are already overdue, but you can customize the date for which it's displaying the information. You'll still likely use the Tasks tab more often than this list here, but it's still useful to give you some insight on what you should be focusing in on. All right, so now that that's all done and that's clear, let's talk about our templates. Now, I avoided focusing on them up until the end in order for you to learn how to create your pipelines from scratch and build a good foundation. However, the templates exist for a reason, and that reason is to significantly speed up your building process and make it a lot easier. I still recommend building your first test pipeline from scratch to get a full grasp on how everything works, since even if you do use templates, you still are going to likely want to modify them to suit whatever it is you're doing in your office. And for that, you're going to need that knowledge. But regardless, for right now, let me go into the Pipelines tab in my Settings page. This time, instead of clicking on the Create button, I'll click Copy from Library. Here, I'll see a list with all the different pipeline templates that we have available. Now, you'll notice that not all of them are in English, and that is because we want to make sure that you have access to them in case you do work with clients from different regions. And once you decide which template you want to copy, just click on the blue copy button on the far right, and it will get added to your list of pipelines. Besides this, any templates that are used for the automations inside of it will also be copied. Both the pipeline and other templates can then be freely edited, just like any other ones you made yourself from scratch. Now, just to make sure this is clear as well, if you go into the Templates tab, you'll have all your templates categorized into subtabs, And in many of those, you will have a copy from library button, just like the one in the pipelines tab. So this way, you can copy the individual templates as well, instead of having to copy an entire pipeline. So at this point, everybody, you are basically ready to rock and roll and get started setting up your workflows. All right, everybody, so let's recap what we went over today. We started with the very basics by explaining what the key terms mean before jumping into the process of building your first pipeline. There, we made sure to explain all the fields that you needed to know about, and then went on to add stages and automations. After talking about regular automations, we also went over how conditional automations work, since there is a very high likelihood of you benefiting from those. Now, following that, we spent a bit of time talking about how your jobs will automatically move from stage to stage before focusing on setting up recurrences. Now, that took some time to cover fully, but once we did, we then went on to explain the ways that you'll be able to handle team assignments through your pipeline. Now, this makes a huge difference in your overall efficiency, so we wanted to be sure that we included that and spent a little time on it. And then finally, at the end, I showed you where and how you will keep track of your jobs and tasks, and then close things out by showing you where you'll find our templates that will save you tons of time and make life a lot easier for you in the future. So as you can all see, we kept very busy today. We covered basically everything you'll need to know to get started with your workflows. Now, this is one of our most dense topics, but also something that every firm is very excited to learn about because of the huge impact this is going to have on all of your processes. Now, we still have several more webinars planned where we'll talk about everything else TaxDome offers, but for now, I would recommend focusing on this primarily. Since you learned about so many things and so many functions today, I would recommend heading to our TaxDome Academy. We've got a full workflow course that covers everything I showed you today in even more detail. So it really is the best way to make sure you get everything set up optimally for you. Be sure to take advantage of that. Then after you create your pipelines, I'd also recommend setting up a call with our support team so that they can check your pipelines, maybe offer some suggestions. If they see some room for improvement or they see a slight mistake, they'll be able to help you out. They have helped thousands of firms with this, so their experience is going to be invaluable. Be sure to take advantage of that. That's it for today, folks. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.